Greetings, YouTube. Happy late Monday night if you're watching this in the United States, or at least on this side of the world. If you are across the pond, you might be waking up to Tuesday morning. Hope you're enjoying your biscuits and tea. People told me the last time I made that reference that was what they were eating. So I'm just going to assume you're eating that again. You probably, maybe you've never eaten it in your life. I don't know. But I wanted to spend just a couple minutes on my channel talking about the new dungeon format because I do believe overall it is absolutely bad for players. It is a step in the wrong direction, and I think I get why Kabam is doing it. Maybe they don't even have a choice, but in general, it's not something that I am a fan of at all. And before you think that I'm just trying to be Mr. Negative, I want you to know I feel strongly about this issue because I have grown to love dungeons. I think that Kabam as a whole has made fantastic strides in the right direction with their dungeon changes, particularly more milestones and moving it from 1 day to 3 days for a cycle, which puts the pressure off to have to do this every night because there became so much content to do so often that when dungeons first came into the contest last summer, I think it was in about May, I just didn't do it. The only time I did dungeons was on Dungeon Day because I think you got a legendary crystal which gave you a 20% chance for a 5-star for free for completing all the milestones of that dungeon run. And I had just started live streaming with my subscribers, and so I wanted to kind of reward some people who had turned out for the first few live streams. And let me tell you, they were brutal. I looked like an 85-year-old man trying to learn how to work a VCR for the first time. It was funny when people would be like, "What do you teach again? Who hired you? Are you sure you're not lying? Like, you teach video production and you can't figure out how to run OBS?" Like, it was embarrassing. But we got better, I think, and we got through it. And so I say that to say I love dungeons, and most importantly, I would still be hunting Stark Spidey if it was not for the dungeon crystal that landed me Starky in the first place. So I owe a huge part of my progression on my channel to the dungeon format. So this isn't some like dungeons are terrible, kabam, rawr. It's not that kind of video. But this video does center around something that I feel like is deceitful to the player base based off of the wording of this post. So this is supposed to be something that we read as players and see it as nothing but a positive thing. In fact, you can see it, the third word of the first sentence after greeting summoners is excited. We are excited to inform you that dungeons have returned. With their return comes the following changes. Okay, dungeon reward catalyst and the room rewards, rather just in milestones. You'll find catalyst fragments and bonus room rewards in dungeons 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. Bonus room rewards grant randomized catalyst ranging from tier 1 class catalyst all the way to tier 2 alpha catalyst fragments, depending on the dungeon difficulty. Now, while that is cool, I guess, at least in the past, these catalyst fragments have been microscopic in terms of actually helping you progress in the game. If you are uncollected especially, versus the tier 2 alpha catalyst fragments that you got for going up to at least rooms 5 or 6 for dungeon 7 when they rolled out this on Dungeon Day in January, you would have way better chance and way better progression just opening your daily free uncollected crystals than you would be grinding your way in dungeons, because it was just a couple hundred tier 2 alpha catalyst. And even when the crystal opening whale posted his, was it like dungeon room 13 and dungeon 7, it was still like just a really, really small chunk for a crazy hard difficulty. It should have been like half a T2 alpha. Instead it was like, I don't know, maybe a tenth of one. It was crazy small. So in order to distract you from the fact that these rewards are so exciting, allegedly, they are doing something really, really huge to take away the refresh timers that were in place. And I believe that this hurts the middle class of MCOC more than anyone. Because even though it's annoying for me to lose maybe, let's say, I think I always start most dungeon runs with the Holy Trinity of 565 Blade, 565 Stark Spidey, and then rank 4, still sadly unawakened, Ghost Rider. And what I like to do in the past, especially with my dungeon buddy Katie Candy, is go on a dungeon run on day 1 of the dungeon cycle, because it was only about a 48-hour or less refresh timer for 5 stars. So I knew if I did dungeons on day 1 of that cycle, by the time that the day 1 of the next dungeon cycle came into the contest 3 days later, all of my champs, including my top champs, were refreshed. This was awesome. It gave me motivation to do everything the first day dungeons was on and then just relax. But Kabam wised up to this, because what I think happened is that they overestimated by a great deal how much summoners would, 1, be excited about dungeons in general, but 2, be willing to spend unit-wise on refreshes. Because it makes way more sense to save your units and just use different champions to do a dungeon run again if you happen to go up against like an impossible node, or maybe you're just not playing well that day and you lose, than it would to spend what could be hundreds of units to refresh your best champions. So if you're like me and you're blessed enough to have multiple 565 5 stars and rank 4 5 stars and even a decent amount of 6 stars, including a rank 2 6 star, you have enough of a bench, so to speak, in the sports analogy, to go to your roster and get it done. I'm yawning in the middle of this, by the way. I think it's almost 10:30 as I'm recording this. Anyhow, but most summoners, they don't have that luxury. You might only have 3 5 stars that are at rank 4 or above, or maybe just 3 5 stars at rank 3, or maybe you're somebody who is doing like Dungeon 6 and you only have 3 or 4 rank 5 4 stars. Well, now you've got a decision to make. Either you bring in your worst champions that are not worth nearly as many points and you kind of roll the dice and hope that you can get your points still, or you bite the bullet and you spend a very decent amount of units to refresh them individually. I would highly recommend, if you watch this, to not do that. Do not reward this new system with your units. Save them for clearing really important content like Act 4 or Act 5 or soon to be Act 6 hopefully, or Variant Difficulty, Labyrinth of Legends, whatever. But do not spend them on refreshes. I don't know anybody, and maybe you're watching this and you actually do this, but I don't know anybody that spent their units on dungeon potions and dungeon revives. It's kind of just a fun bonus event to do with a friend. And by the way, the friendship system also has gotten way better. It doesn't feel like a sketchy version of MCOC Tinder anymore, although maybe Tinder in general is still a sketchy version of anything. I don't know. I've never been on it. But in general, this is an improvement again, and I want to be balanced in this video. I think in general, Dungeons is a great addition to the game. I have benefited personally from it. Quite a few people have. And even when I didn't land a Massacre or an Electro or a Ghost Rider in my last Dungeon Crystal, I still duped my Old Balls Logan for the first time. And hey, that's a first-time Silver Star. Can't complain about that. But when you look down at the refresh timers, which happens to be at the very bottom of this post, maybe they're trying to bury it, it's really significant. When you look at 4 stars, it's 44 hours, almost 2 days worth of waiting. It's what the 5-star refreshes used to be. And then the 5 stars, 92 hours. So they are shut out almost from 2 full cycles of dungeon runs if you do not spend 80 units, and I believe that's per champion, or 240 units total to get those 3 5 stars back. I don't think this is going to be a huge deal for me because I'll just go to my next 3 5 stars, but it could be a huge deal if you only have 3 great 5 stars. And really, I don't think Kabam's going to get their desired outcome out of this. They're thinking that people are going to be so desperate to complete dungeons that they're just going to start throwing units at potions and revives or refreshes of champs. But that's not going to happen. I just think people will stop doing dungeons because they're just not going to do it. And so it's actually hurting the player base, which was very excited about dungeons, I think, as a whole, to not be as excited about it. It reminds me of how I don't think they realized how much people would hate Alliance War even more by the new 4-hour time window for placement, where at least on this side of the globe, you're having to maybe lose an Alliance War. I had 2 different people reach out to me in the last Alliance War saying, Prof, we are the better alliance in the matchup, but we're going to lose because half our BG is asleep, and they either didn't set an alarm or didn't care enough to do their path, and I honestly don't blame them. Oh, by the way, if you're looking to do a 6-star champ, you better look again, because 140 hours of a refresh timer or 120 units per for 6 stars, that is just an insane amount of hours to wait to refresh. So this is some rewards, quote-unquote exciting rewards system that's really disguised as a way to hurt players from being able to run their best teams on day 1 or even day 2 of the dungeon cycle, which will ultimately not only make it less valuable or motivational to run dungeons, but also burn people out as well. The community seemed to be pretty much in agreement and in unison from what I saw when they tried this out on Dungeon Day in January, that they were not a fan of this for the refresh times, especially with the pittance of rewards that we got in exchange for this. But for whatever reason, maybe it was monetarily, I mean, of course it's monetarily, it's Kabam, right? They brought this back permanently, and I just have to say, I am not a fan of it at all. I think it hurts the people who are trying to grow their rosters in the middle, whether it be 4 stars or 5 stars the most. It's going to be the case where they're just not going to do dungeons as much, or they're just going to be a little bitter because now instead of having their champions ready to go in the next dungeon cycle, they've got to wait until day 2 or day 3, and that completely defeats the purpose of going to 3-day cycles because they wanted people to be able to play on their own. And now if you want to not have to use units, you're going to have to strategically say, okay, my champions will be expired and ready to go in 92 hours, and that's going to be about 4 days from now, and because of that, I'm just going to have to hope on that night that my dungeon partner is ready. There's still going to be there's still going to be ways to work around it, but at the same time, it's just a pain, and it's unnecessary, and I really think overall this is a step backward for what I thought was a fantastic addition to the game in the last few months, and still overall, I think there's more positive than negative when you get who you want from the free dungeon crystals. But nothing comes free in this game. Kabam, of course, it's a for-profit company. Their job is to get you to spend, and they just made it a lot harder to use the same champs, your best champs, every time during the dungeon week, especially in the next cycle once you've used them in the previous cycle. And as somebody who tries to look out for especially that middle player, that middle tier player that feels like their voice isn't heard as much on YouTube, this really hurts you. There's just no other way to put it. And I would love to see and hear your feedback on this in the comments below. And otherwise, have a great night or a great morning, depending on when you're watching this. Either way, thanks for clicking on this, and thanks for supporting my Marvel Contest of Champions YouTube channel.